I never thought I'd see him again. Not like this. Not across a courtroom, eyes sharp and cold, defending her. The woman he left me for. My husband of 7 years, my silence of 10. The man who once promised to protect me, now arguing against me like I was a stranger trying to steal her spotlight. That was the moment I stopped grieving. That was the moment I truly came back to life. 10 years. 7 married. 3 separated. And the rest in ghosted memories. He was always the type who used silence like a weapon. We never had a dramatic end. Just distance. Just emptiness. And when he left like a lawyer. Clean, calculated, legal. I kept the house. He kept the narrative. And the woman, she came just months later, barely hidden. She was younger, softer, smarter, maybe, and she was his client first. I found out through an article. Promising young attorney takes on delicate scandal case with rising influencer. I knew that name, knew that face. She was the woman who once smiled too brightly at our dinner table, swearing she respected our marriage. Now she was standing beside him, hand on his arm, like she belonged there. And I was left rewriting my life in silence. Until I couldn't anymore. It started with the contract dispute, a brand she stole from under me, using ideas I had pitched, words I had written. I filed the lawsuit without flinching. I had proof. I had fire. What I didn't have was the warning that he would be the one showing up in court in a tailored suit, defending her lies with that same voice he once used to defend me. The first hearing broke something in me I didn't know was still alive. He didn't even blink when he saw me. No greeting. No hesitation. Just strategy. Just objections. Just smiles for her. She wore white. She always wore white, like she hadn't taken anything, like she was pure. I sat there, hands clenched under the desk, thinking, this is it. This is where the last pieces of me die. But I didn't break. I studied them. Her posture. His tone. The way he leaned toward her, like they shared a secret. And as I watched them mock what I built, I felt something I hadn't in years: clarity. This wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning. I hadn't walked into that courtroom alone. I had walked in with everything they'd underestimated. My pain, my preparation, my power. I went home that night and pulled out the box. The one I kept hidden behind tax folders and old letters. Inside, journals, screenshots, late-night emails he once sent when he was torn between doing the right thing and being happy. I had never used them. I had never stooped that low. But now, it wasn't about revenge. It was about record, truth, and proof that I hadn't lost him. He had lost me. The next hearing, I didn't wear black. I wore red. The color he once said was too bold for me. I let my hair down. Walked in like I wasn't afraid. Because I wasn't. I had mourned long enough. This wasn't my heartbreak story anymore. This was my testimony. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to show up as the woman they thought they had buried. When he saw me, he faltered. Just for a second. His hand tensed. Her expression shifted. I smiled politely. Sat down. And when the judge called us forward, I didn't tremble. I let the truth speak. And every word I said, calm, clear, composed, was a nail in the narrative they had built without me. Because I had been his wife, then his past, but now, I was his reckoning. He tried to rattle me with objections. Classic lawyer tactics. Interruptions, overclarifications, smug side glances. But what he didn't realize was that I had lived through something worse than his legal games. I had lived through him, through the years of being talked over, minimized, loved conditionally. So no, I didn't flinch. I responded with precision, with receipts, with facts. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standard. Her lawyer, the woman who replaced me, was him. But my advocate was me. I knew their story better than anyone. I knew the timeline, the lies, the rehearsed innocence. I had once coached him for trials. Now I was dismantling the character he had become, bit by bit, brick by brick. With every answer I gave, her face lost a little more color. And his eyes, they stopped meeting mine altogether. During the break, I passed him in the hallway. He said nothing, but his hand hovered just for a second, like he wanted to stop me. Like maybe a shred of guilt survived in that hollow chest. I looked him straight in the eye and whispered, "Don't confuse familiarity with forgiveness." And then I walked away. I didn't look back. That hallway belonged to me now. The next witness was a brand executive, my former partner. He confirmed that the stolen pitch she used to launch her campaign was based entirely on my original ideas. Word for word. He hesitated under oath. I didn't. I leaned forward and said, "Please read the date on that file." It was dated 6 months before she and I ever met. He nodded. The judge leaned back. I could feel the air change. I looked at her, so smug, so put together. But her eyes were glass now. She didn't smile anymore. Her fingers fidgeted with her pen. I used to do that when I was scared. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the late-night messages. The way she comforted him while I was still his wife. The way she profited from my silence. That wasn't love. That was strategy. And now the consequences were calling. They asked me why I waited so long to file. My answer was simple, because I was healing. And healed women are thorough. That line hit like a hammer. Even the courtroom reporter paused. It wasn't dramatic. It was just true. I didn't rush into revenge. I built it carefully, like a house I planned to live in. And now, every brick was holding. She cried. On the 3rd day of hearings, her voice broke when she realized I wasn't backing down. She looked at him like he was supposed to save her. And for a moment, I saw it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Not because of love, but because he was finally beginning to understand that I was the one with everything to lose and nothing left to fear. He requested a sidebar with the judge. Something about reconsidering their countersuit. The judge refused. "You open this door, counselor," she said. "Now you'll walk through it." And he did. Shoulders squared, jaw clenched, watching his own credibility unravel on record. All the charm in the world couldn't undo what had been documented. On the final day of testimony, I submitted one last document. An NDA, one he made me sign during our separation, claiming it was to protect both our reputations. I had kept it sealed, but I brought it anyway. I didn't even have to read it out loud. I just held it up. The judge nodded, and her lawyer's face turned white, because the man defending her had once silenced me. And now I wasn't quiet anymore. I didn't win because I was better. I won because I was done begging to be believed. And once a woman stops needing approval, there's nothing left to take from her. The verdict didn't come with fanfare. No applause. No gavel-slamming drama. Just quiet affirmation. The judge leaned forward and said, "In favor of the plaintiff." My name. Not hers. Not his. Mine. The court awarded me damages, back pay, and the official acknowledgement that the creative property in question was stolen. My work. My voice. My power. It was a win carved from every moment I had been ignored. She didn't look at me. He did briefly, but it wasn't hatred or anger in his eyes. It was something worse, realization. He realized that I hadn't come to fight them. I came to bury the version of myself that let them win for so long. I stood, gathered my things, and walked out of that courtroom like it belonged to me. Because it did. Outside, reporters hovered. They wanted a statement. I gave them one. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's just long overdue. I didn't need to humiliate them. The truth had done that for me. I wasn't the woman scorned. I was the woman returned. Reborn in the courtroom, where I was once forgotten, now walking away with everything they thought I wouldn't survive losing. I got into the car and exhaled. My attorney grinned. "You kept your promise," she said. "You told me you'd walk in like fire and leave a stone." I smiled, just barely. "No," I said. "Stone doesn't burn. I walked in as smoke, and I left as flame." She laughed, but she knew. We both knew I had won more than a case. I had reclaimed my story. He emailed me. A week later. Just a line. "You were always better than me." I just didn't want to admit it. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because his words had no place in the woman I'd become. Closure doesn't always need a conversation. Sometimes silence is the final line in the story you don't want to rewrite. She disappeared from the spotlight. Quietly. No public statements. No Instagram captions about learning and growing. She vanished the same way she entered, strategically. And honestly, I didn't care. My story wasn't about her anymore. She had been a plot device, a foil, a warning, but not the main character. That was me now. Fully. Finally. I published an article, "The Ex-Wife's Defense." It went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it was honest, about what it means to be underestimated, about what it costs to rise, about the quiet rage women carry when they've been erased, and how sweet the air feels once you exhale for yourself. I didn't use their names. I didn't need to. The women who needed it knew. And suddenly, I wasn't just a plaintiff, or a former wife, or a footnote in a courtroom transcript. I was a voice, a warning, a blueprint. Women reached out. Lawyers, entrepreneurs, creatives, wives, daughters. You gave me the courage to speak. You made me believe it's not too late. That was the real win. Not the check. Not the legal record. The ripple. One night, I stood in front of a mirror, not to check my makeup, but to look, just look, at the woman staring back. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She had walked through betrayal, through courtrooms, through silence, and turned it into fire. She had faced the man she once loved and told him without saying a word, "You will never hold power over me again." And that night, for the first time in 10 years, I slept without bracing for disappointment. Because justice didn't free me. I freed myself. I moved out of the city a few months later. Not to hide, but to begin again. A coastal town, just quiet enough for peace, but alive enough to not feel lonely. I found a small place with wide windows and floors that creaked. I painted the walls myself. Chose every piece of furniture. No compromises. No approval needed. For the first time in years, everything around me felt like mine. I started freelancing again, writing for myself, consulting women-led brands. I no longer accepted partnerships that meant doing all the work while someone else took the credit. My inbox filled with contracts and thank you notes, not for the lawsuit, but for the story, for surviving, for showing that walking away isn't weakness. It's strategy. Sometimes I would see headlines about him. Smaller cases. Fewer interviews. He was shrinking in the very world he once dominated. But I didn't gloat. That was his path. And I wasn't walking beside him anymore. I had my own road now. Unpaved, imperfect, but honest. I joined a women's advocacy group. Not as a speaker. Just as a member. I sat in circles with women who had also been silenced, used, rewritten. I listened. I learned. I shared. And I found something I hadn't even known I needed. Community. Not the kind built on shared trauma, but on shared power. One night after a meeting, a woman approached me and said, "You're the one who took him to court, right?" I hesitated. She smiled. "Good. Because when you stood up for yourself, you stood up for a lot of us too. And that was better than any verdict. That was legacy." I kept the judgment papers in a box. Not on display. Not to show off. But to remind myself, you did this. You didn't just survive him. You unlearned the idea that you ever needed him. Every now and then, I'd open the box, reread the lines that proved I had been right all along, and smile, not with revenge, but with relief. He sent one last letter, handwritten, said he hoped I was doing well, that he was sorry, that maybe in another life, things could have gone differently. I tore it in half, not because I was angry, but because that life is over. I'm not waiting for a better version of him. I've already met the best version of me. The woman he defended in court now lives in silence. She lost her brand deals, her followers, her reputation. She was never built for truth, only for performance. And without someone to protect her narrative, it collapsed. But again, not my concern. I wasn't built to monitor her downfall. I was built to rise from mine. And rise I did, not in a blaze of headlines or public revenge, but in the quiet, dignified way healed women do. I built routines I loved, boundaries that held, and friendships that didn't need explanation. I stopped explaining myself entirely. If people didn't understand me, they weren't meant to, because in the end, I didn't walk out of that courtroom to prove them wrong. I walked out to prove that I was always right to walk away. I started dating again. Slowly, casually. Not because I needed someone, but because I was finally open to connection, not rescue. The first man I went to dinner with asked, "So, what ended your last relationship?" I smiled and said, "A courtroom." He blinked. I didn't explain. The right ones never need a full backstory. They feel your peace and meet you in it. He wasn't like my ex. He didn't fill silence with legal jargon or compliments that came with strings. He listened. He asked questions. He didn't try to define me, just tried to know me. And I didn't fall hard. I rose slowly, because now I knew love wasn't supposed to feel like negotiation. One afternoon, I stood in front of my closet and realized something strange. I didn't own anything he had ever picked out. No more blouses he liked. No more heels I wore just to match his height. Everything I had now was mine, chosen for comfort, color, confidence. It wasn't about fashion. It was about identity. And I had finally dressed like myself. I wrote another article. This one was titled, "The Woman They Didn't Expect to Return." It was about how quiet women aren't weak, how being dismissed is often the beginning of reinvention. I wrote about courtroom shadows, betrayal in tailored suits, and what happens when the woman you counted out decides to fight back. It went viral. Again, invitations followed, panels, podcasts, interviews. But I said yes only to the ones that aligned with my truth. Not everyone gets to profit off my pain. My voice was not for spectacle. It was for solidarity. Every platform I stepped on, I stepped with care. Not just for me, but for the women watching silently, waiting for someone like them to speak. My parents called after one interview. My mother cried. She said, "I didn't know you were hurting so long." I told her, I didn't either, until I stopped pretending it didn't hurt. We cried together, not from sadness, but from clarity, because sometimes you don't realize how deep the wound is until you speak it out loud. And then it begins to heal. I bought land, a small piece, just enough for a home built from the ground up. No shared mortgages, no quiet compromises, just bricks, beams, and vision. I worked with a woman-led firm, designed every corner myself. A studio for writing, A reading nook under the stairs. Windows that welcomed every sunrise. It wasn't just a house. It was my symbol. The first night I slept in it, the rain fell soft on the roof. I curled up in a blanket, tea in hand, manuscript pages beside me. I wasn't waiting for the next twist, the next heartbreak, the next betrayal. I wasn't bracing anymore. I was present, completely, and I whispered into the quiet, "You made it," because I had. Through every fire, through every silence, through every courtroom glare, I made it. Years later, a new lawyer joined our advocacy group. She introduced herself and said, "Your story was one of the reasons I went into this field." I smiled and shook her hand. Full circle. The student becomes the survivor. The survivor becomes the guide. I didn't need statues or speeches. That moment was enough. And if he ever tells this story, if he tries to rewrite it for comfort, I hope he remembers this. I didn't just survive him. I outgrew him, outloved him, outlasted him, and I turned the courtroom where he defended her into the exact place I defended myself.